We will go ahead and call our meeting to order. Ms. Weaver, would you call the roll?
Mr. DeGraw?
Here.
Mr. Benshoff?
Here.
Mr. Haas?
Here.
Ms. Lesage? Here. Mr. Bell? Absent. Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Ms. Spence? Here. Ms. Marotti?
Here.
Mr. Bartels is absent, and
Alrighty, thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome Ms. Erin Marotti, our new member to the committee, recently elected to the Board of Education. Welcome. And I think before we begin, because Ms. Marotti is new to the committee, if we all just maybe give a brief introduction of ourselves, go around the table. We'll start.
I'm Teresa Lesage, and let's see if we can get my title right. I am the district-wide elementary assistant principal and CHAMPS coordinator. Wow, so I help the elementary principals get the job.
Bethany Spence, and I'm the admin secretary at North Pole.
I'm Charles Rollins, and I'm the day custodian at North Pole Elementary.
Of course, I teach at Lathrop.
I've been a teacher in the district for 10 years. My current job is
Heather Heineken. I'm the Director of Business Services and
Chief Operations Officer. All right. Yes. You want to give a brief introduction, or? Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. Put you on the spot here.
I think
they should all be on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm Erin Marotti. I am newly the elected treasurer for the school board, and I'll be on the budget committee and the audit committee. And just to give you a brief background, my background educationally is in accounting with a minor in economics. I've worked in commercial finance for 10 years, and nonprofit finance for about 10 years. So I'm currently at the Interior Alaska Center as the fiscal and operations director, and I have a 16-year-old at Lathrop and Hutch. She goes back and forth. I live in North Pole, so I don't get radio in my house. But I should look into that.
It's another service we provide.
Yeah. I really respect what you guys do. I know I'm coming into this in the middle of it, so I will do my best to catch up. I'm reading this wonderfully interesting book here, and I really look forward to working with you guys. This is a passion of mine, so I love to get into the numbers. So this will be great. And thanks for inviting me and having me here.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I didn't get an agenda into the PowerPoint presentation, but you do have hard copy of the agenda, I believe, in your packet. So we'll follow that. I'll give a general update in 3 different areas: enrollment, revenue, and the borough ordinance. And then we'll look at some budget survey results. We just received those, I believe, yesterday. The communications department is still in the process of accumulating. There was over 900 responses, so good response rate. And so we're gonna present these officially to the board on December 4th, and so we'll just see some general feedback, or not feedback, but summary of responses of the different questions. And then actual copies of the entire survey will be distributed on the 4th. You guys are getting the first peek. We didn't want to distribute hard copies before the board sees them. So we'll go over that, and then we'll review. I put together a draft version of our budget committee report to the board that will be presented on the 4th, and we'll look over that and hear thoughts and feedback and have a discussion about that as well. All right. Give an update. We'll go over some enrollment figures that we have, both actual count and projection numbers. Review revenue, up-to-date revenue projections, and then the borough ordinance. So that's been there's been times when I've forgotten that I actually have a regular job, being tied up with this borough ordinance situation. But we're making some decent progress, I think. So I'll give an update on that as well. So enrollment information, the 20-day actual count. So in October, we do an actual count of enrolled students in the district, and that came in at 13,279. Our projection for this year that we made last year was 13,643. So about 360 roughly students down. And it's actually right around 400 actual drop from a year ago. So pretty significant drop, unfortunately. Interestingly enough, before we submit that 20-day actual count to the state, we actually, about 2 weeks before that, we submit projections for next year to the state. And so our projections for next year are another slight decrease at 13,205. The Eielson growth topic has been kind of a hot topic, and it's kind of presented in the district with an interesting dilemma of, we've been told it's been a topic that's been ongoing for the last, at least 2 or 3 years, I would say, and trying to pinpoint the timeline of when we're going to start to see an uptick in growth from that F-35 bed down has been kind of a challenge. So the Colonel, it's not Hans Benson?
Andra?
No, there was a different one. He presented at the chamber lunch yesterday, and it wasn't Bondurant. It's like Hansen or Benson. Talked yesterday at the chamber lunch, and his PowerPoint showed the bulk of the arrival coming in 20 and 21. So a little bit of an arrival here in 19, which, of course, when we're down 300 or 400 students, we're not really seeing anything, I don't think. But so next year, 2020 and 21, hopefully we start to see growth from that event. So we've, in attempting to predict that growth, this was a graph that was presented to the board about a month ago at a work session, and this red line, these are kind of hard to see, but this red line here. So there's certain estimates. This red line is going to be roughly 60% of what the F-35 growth projection is estimated at for students, enrolled students in the district. The blue line would be if 100% of those projections came about. And so you can see at 100% at the peak is about right in here, 2025-26, roughly 1,100 student increase. And at 60%, 700 or so student increase. Roddy.
Is there a reason specifically for the 60% estimate, or is it just like kind of bracketing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just we felt like 50% might be too low, but honestly speaking, in our internal discussions, there's somewhat of a hesitance to really count on 100% of the projections. And so I'll say there's no scientific rationale behind the 60%, just kind of given another benchmark or another number to consider. So that hopefully should be happening. Again, the bulk of the increase right in here in the next couple of years, and then it kind of flattens out. So another data point that's difficult to rely on is Department of Labor statistics that the borough uses and are published on a state level. Actually shows a baseline without the F-35 growth, a baseline increasing, and we just haven't experienced that in the school district. We're actually experiencing the opposite. And it's interesting, in that same, this report too. Were you at that work session, Ms. Marty? Yeah. There was a chart that Ellis Ott had back in, it was like 2002, and somebody had made a similar projection of what we're seeing right now of this increasing population base. And Ellis, Mr. Ott, superimposed actuals against that projected increase, and it was exactly opposite. It was a downward trend. It created this huge gap.
And they couldn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but they couldn't determine why they were so off either.
No.
There was no reason for it. It was just wrong.
Right. Needless to say, the district's very cautious in our approach to projecting and trying to predict student enrollment increases. Revenue. So the revenue impact of that reduced enrollment is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million. The range is probably between 2.8 and 3.1 million. For next year, for the 2020 school year, fiscal year, there's an additional $30 million statewide one-time appropriation. And so in the current year, we had $20 million one-time, which is roughly $2 million for our district. And next year, it'll be $30 million, which will be roughly $3 million. So an additional $1 million for next year. And then I think the political, coming out of the elections in November, I think it's going to be kind of fascinating to see what happens in the next, I would say, I was going to say 6 to 12 months, but maybe in the next month to 12 months, because we it's going to be interesting to see how things unfold early on. There's been, I think without getting into too many specifics, there's been a certain amount of rhetoric by the newly elected governor in the past, and there's obviously very wide-ranging opinions on what might unfold. So where it's going to be, all eyes are going to be focused on legislative issues this year, and we'll see what happens. But education is on the top of the list as far as priorities are concerned, I think, in the public's viewpoint. And so I think there's going to be, if there are attempts at cuts, I think there will be a lot of pressure to keep those at a minimum, if any at all. So I think organizations are gearing up to advocate. So, and then an update on the borough ordinance. So starting with the current ordinance. So there is a standing ordinance that's on the table, and the Assembly has delayed voting on that a couple of times now. And this might be a review. I think we might have talked about this in our. Yeah, it probably was. Yeah. So the details of that current standing ordinance are it would cap the cumulative fund balances of the 5 major funds at 18% of the local contribution made by the borough. So that would be roughly $9 million. It lapses any funds above that cap and it lapses those funds into the facilities maintenance reserve fund at the borough for the school district to go into facility projects. And it caps that lapse amount at $7 million per year. That's an amendment that came in. The original ordinance lapsed all funds above that cap. And then another key point of the original ordinance was that it was retroactive, dating back to June 30th of 2018. So it actually was proposing a retroactive lapse of dollars. So we are hopeful that a substitute ordinance will be presented to the Assembly. Ideally, for the school district, there's no ordinance, but I think there's going to be some form of ordinance. So we're trying to get the best ordinance that we can for the school district. It would cap the district fund balances at a higher level, significantly higher than 18%. They're still throwing numbers around. We're trying to get it up into the 40 to 50% range local contribution. But that remains to be set. It would involve the district making a contribution to the Facilities Maintenance Reserve Fund at the borough. Either that or another option that we're looking at is setting those dollars aside internally within the school district, putting those dollars into our capital projects funds for the purpose of projects. And that would be a little non-traditional because the borough is responsible for major component level projects for the school district. They own the buildings, but we're researching some alternative ways to. If we lapse funds back to the borough, that creates, and I won't go into details, but it creates a trickle-down effect where we would end up having to lapse money back to the state of Alaska. And then the borough has pledged that they would keep the district whole, and so they would be returned about $1.4 million. We would end up sending back to Alaska, the state, and then the borough would. It's really messy. So we're trying to make it work to where we can hold those dollars internally and avoid kind of the messy movement of money all over the place. And then hopefully that substitute ordinance would eliminate the retroactive clause, and that we're hoping that some kind of a contribution by the district towards facility products would replace any lapse for the current year, the 18-19 fiscal year. And then we'd move forward with the new cap amount into the 2020 year. So as of today, we're still waiting for draft language of that substitute ordinance. We're pretty confident there will be a substitute ordinance, but we're still waiting on draft language there. So this would present a significant improvement, I think, obviously, over the current standing ordinance. So we're hopeful. Right, budget survey results. So this is question 1. This was, which of the following district functions do you value the most, from the highest value and down to the least? Interestingly enough, it's kind of hard to see, although I'm blind. So, interestingly enough, it is a pretty close range, a tight range. Starting with class size, I think that was no surprise. Class size is extremely important. And then
schools and facilities.
Is it?
I can't see it.
Academic intervention.
Okay.
Comprehensive course.
Comprehensive course offerings. So it's academic intervention supports for students. That's
Find that a little bit more, the academic intervention.
one of our, yes.
I think perhaps at the elementary level, we're talking about maybe restoring or having something similar to the response to intervention at the lower levels to try to make sure that all students are reading on grade level by 3rd grade. That was a real big push. And then as you're going up into the higher levels, it would be
you might have said this already. Any certain particular subject categories?
Generally, it's reading and math.
Reading and math.
We had Erie and Emmy for primary students, which funded tutors for additional targeted interventions with students so that they could move forward.
Colorblind. So I'm trying to read the
You're
numbers.
blind, I'm blind, and you're colorblind. So
Teamwork.
Good.
What does the 1, 2, 3, 5th one down say?
Clean.
Okay.
Schools and facilities. Several of those are cut off, so I'm just filling in the blanks, I think. Yeah, clean and well-maintained schools and facilities. And 6, let's see. Supports for students. Yeah, academic intervention supports, and then social emotional supports.
For the tech and students and, what's after the and? Teachers? Okay, good.
Yeah, technology for students and staff, yeah.
Okay.
Co-curricular activities and sports. 9 is options in schools and programs.
I mean,
In parentheses, it says e-learning, dual credit, and K-8. K-12 magnet option is also being researched, vetted out.
so I don't know if anybody can read the numbers, but the first two look really close in number. Sorry, guys.
Fine.
It is
So
hard
it's,
to read.
yeah,
Yeah,
and then
it's
it's
a little-
4.06.
Really close too, huh?
Yep, and then it drops down to 3.9.
8-3.
8.3, okay. So the top 7 are within one.
Yeah.
Higher range is, 4.4 or 1.4. Yeah. No, I haven't.
No,
That's a good question. I haven't gotten into standard deviation from my investment strategy days. Yeah, that's
This would be a good one for class.
so that was question 1. Question 2. So if the Fairbanks North Suburban School District must reduce spending in 1920, rank in order the most acceptable reductions. 1 being, I think one, this might be reading wrong. 1 being the most acceptable is that okay? Okay.
Backwards.
It's backwards. Is it not?
But I
Somebody
think it
correct me if I'm wrong.
does reflect pretty nicely the priorities on the other page.
Yeah, it's almost an exact mirror image of
Oh, yeah.
class size is the least acceptable.
So it's explained. It does say most acceptable and least acceptable, so that's good. And pointing out that class size, is the least. District operations, I think that's not a surprising. Typically, district operations the farthest away from students, and so that would be a natural response. I think that's not surprising. Sports and co-curricular activities. Is that surprising in that second? Probably not, I guess. Comparison to academics,
About the elective course choices is that we don't have anywhere to put kids to give preps to teachers in secondary if we don't have electives.
I think it's it is a reflection of the previous graph, but some of the categories changed. On the first page, there was a thing that talked about the additional programs like e-learning, and it's possible, because you're right, there need to be electives just to put kids. It could be that some of those things maybe we're getting interpreted here, maybe elective course choices, people were still thinking e-learning and those other programs that aren't.
There's actually 11 categories here instead of 9.
Right.
I don't think library services was on the other one.
And nursing is on this one, and I don't believe it was on the other one as well. For health services, sorry.
You can just take algebra twice.
Elective algebra.
Some people need it.
I was just going to say 3 times. Yeah.
So, yes, I think as far as I think it sends a clear message based on the survey results. If you're starting from a cut, if you're in a cut scenario, the starting point would be the farthest away from students as possible, and the least, the last place you look is the closest to possible to students. So, which would be the class size. Any comments or remarks?
similar to the other list, though, aside from the first most acceptable place, the rest of them are very close.
Right.
Minimal.
Yeah, there is a pretty tight range.
Well, I guess it shows that people have pretty clear priorities.
Questions 3 and 4 were open-ended questions, and so they're in the process of compiling 900 responses to both questions. Question 5 was an activity-related question. So to what extent do you agree with the following statement? The district should increase activity fees in order to offset expenses of extracurricular activities. Maybe it would have been appropriate or offset increasing or rising expenses of extracurricular activities. So, interesting, just shy of 60% were on the either slightly agree or agree, 16% neutral, no opinion, 5%.
Are there, for equity's sake, options for students that can't afford an increased fee?
I imagine there are scholarships, some subsidy available, I'd imagine. But I'm not.
It depends on the school and the school program.
It could run possibly through either the activity or the local fund, which is donations. Local fund is donations. But yeah, I would imagine there possibly are opportunities for that, yes. Then the last question was simply, I think, a demographics question. Either parent, guardian, district employee, projectors, twitching. And then a community member or a student. Yeah, it is. Yep. Probably, yeah, community member, parent, or employee and parent, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So, yes, these results will be presented to the board on the 4th. They will be distributed to, I believe, in some manner to department heads, directors, and these results, I know on my end, are going to be used in combination with the strategic plan in making budget decisions. So, I think I don't know if we've done budget surveys in the past. Have we done them in the past? Okay, so not to this degree necessarily. But I think it's a good opportunity for people to have their voices heard, and yeah, I'd like to just kind of for this group, we have the space for 7 parents / community members on this committee. So I'm going to keep trying. So if anybody on the committee ever hears, oh yeah, I never get a chance, you got to preach, get on the committee. So we want to hear everybody's voices. Right. And then lastly, the budget committee report. This is a draft report that you have a hard copy of. Everybody should have a hard copy of that.
I was able to send it today.
Oh, okay. And also emailed, yes. Yes. We emailed it to everyone as well. The first page, and I don't know if everybody's had a chance to read it, go through it. The first page is very similar, if not identical in certain portions, to last year's report to the board. It's pretty much an overview of the scope and function of the budget committee, the role and the working principles that the committee works under. And so also shows that the committee was established in 2017 by policy. And again, roles, working principles of the committee. The second page it gets into an overview of the activities that we have been working under over the last 3 meetings. Actually, we're in our 4th meeting, and then goes into specific points of input and feedback to the board. The 3 that we have in there are establishing a legislative priority, advocating for improved. I went specific and went retirement plan. So I've seen some other narratives that kind of danced around the core issue and maybe mentioned the retirement plan towards the end, but I just threw that up front and center. I talk about maybe combining with the district, the board, not the board, but the district. There's a legislative committee that meets. They have their first meeting 2 weeks ago, and it's possible that we could piggyback with that committee and have some kind of a statement or a report coming out of that committee as well, where we can advocate for improvements made there through that committee as well. The second point was addressing technology integration across the district. So the first point in the strategic plan, it goes towards organizational excellence, and I think it was high quality staff, if I recall correctly. Copy of my strategic plan, but organizational excellence, quality of staff. Workforce excellence, attract, retain, and develop excellence in our employees. And then number 2, integrating a broad systematized approach to technology integration across the district. And so I want to go over this, and if there's suggestions or feedback to these narratives, I'm very open to that feedback. We had talked about sometimes there can be a variation in that integration from building to building, probably depending on multiple factors. It could be leadership within the building. It could be even staff. Some staff members have more training or more expertise in certain areas. So this maybe this could be an added point of this could go to even not only a systematized approach, but also maybe utilize more training or different training or something to that effect. Could be appropriate to put in there. But this went towards technology integration as a support. Ensure technology is embedded within instruction to support personalized learning. And personalized learning is number 1 in the strategic plan. So. The third point was to develop a fund balance utilization plan. Last year, this recommendation stated a specific number. I kind of wanted to steer clear of suggesting a specific number. Last year it was $2.8 million in the report, and that ended up being in the neighborhood of $6 million. So I think for me, what I gleaned from that was right now we're really so early in the budgeting process, it's difficult to really try to pinpoint a specific number or recommend a certain number. And so I know right now the board is very interested in. We've talked on a high level about coming up with a plan that goes towards ensuring the best we can a level stable delivery of education, and at the same time trying to balance that. This is difficult. It's not easy, but balance that with trying to maintain and preserve district resources the best we can, get those to be prolonged as much as we can. Hopefully, within the next 2 to 3 years, we can see an uptick in revenue. We can't count on that, but we can hope. But again, having a balanced approach between providing the best education we have with preserving our fund balance and making sure we don't burn through that at too high of a rate, I think is kind of a good balanced approach to take. So I know the board's very concerned about that. And again, protecting those class size numbers are going to be at the top of the list. So that was the third point. I had talked about in our last meeting, I believe, having a fourth point centered around our transportation situation and getting multiple bidders to the table. But I didn't feel we're going to do that. Ryan Hinton, our transportation director, he's very passionate about this topic, and I didn't feel it was necessary. The board wouldn't necessarily be involved in the activities at that level. It's more kind of an in-the-weeds activity that he and I are going to be have our sleeves rolled up and be diligent in seeking out additional bidders in our next transportation bid. So didn't necessarily feel that was necessary to have in this report. Comments, feedback, complaints? Yes, so again, this will be December 4th. It's on the agenda to be presented to the board. And
the first one at the annual Alaska Association of School Boards conference, they did bring that up in their legislative work. And also, and it's kind of on a sad note, but the Teacher of the Year announced in front of the entire conference that he'll be leaving the state of Alaska due to the lack of retirement benefits.
Yeah.
The Teacher of the Year. And shut everybody up.
Probably a big gasp.
With him.
Yep.
Yeah, probably a big gasp across the whole, yeah.
But it was eye-opening. So the board, and most of the board was there, and all the boards across the state were there. And so it's definitely being looked at. It's real. Very closely.
It's very real. Yeah, we're in the process in the very beginning stages of setting our priorities, lobbying priorities in Juneau. I'll be making a trip. I think it's in February or March, and that's going to be at the top of my list personally to really try to have some impact. I know that's on a lot of people's radar, so that's why I have it number one. Things begin and end with a quality workforce, and something of this nature that's important to a lot of people. You got salary, and very close are health insurance and retirement. Those two are very high on people's radar, so I think it's important. Other comments?
I'd also say I'm glad to see that first one in there. I think that's any change to that system is going to take a big effort from lots of groups. It's not going to be any one.
Right.
The incentives. So I'm also in that in the defined contribution plan, the Tier 3 TERS system, and the other people here might be in the same or in similar.
Yeah.
The incentives that generates are, for a teacher at least, that your choice is either to leave after 5 years and take this pool of money and go, which is very attractive, or to settle in and plan to work until you're 67.
Right.
Which for me will be a 42-year career, and I'm working really hard now, but I don't know how good I'm going to be in another 32 years from now.
Right.
And then also there's lots of little things for sick leave. There's no value to that upon retirement, so the incentive is, well, just use it. You don't need to save it for anything. So, taking sick days for doctor's appointments during the school year is the smarter move than waiting summer, just because. Tier 3 TERS and Tier 4 PERS.
Because Tier 2 and Tier 1, they get sick days if you have 180 of them at the end of the time you retire. That counts towards another year.
PERS, it doesn't count.
At all, that's right. Yeah.
So there is an incentive in 1 and 2, but none in 3 and 4.
Not in 3, too. Well,
they
yes.
only have a 3. PERS only has 3.
Okay, only 3 tiers in TERS.
So the incentive in Tier 1 or Tier 2 for teachers is to save your sick leave if you can, right? Be in the classroom, which is one point, and save it because it'll help you in retirement. And for Tier 3, it's kind of a use it or lose it scenario.
Okay.
All the different incentives kind of are working against us. I am glad to see that. I do notice that one of the things that's not in here is something that was in here, or in the same letter last year, the idea of thinking about a more describe a maybe a more clear, transparent staffing allocation. We had talked about tying a number to things. I always go back to PTR. When you're looking at budget, it's easy to say, well, we can move this number up half a student, and then quantify the savings there. So it's easy. When I was a student at Lathrop, my favorite example, when I was a student at Lathrop, there were 1,400 students there. With 4 counselors and 4 principals. And now we're at about 950 students with 4 counselors and 4 principals. And they're still overworked. I get that. But when we're looking at trying to quantify things, maybe having those ratios for other positions as well. Although it's a scary thing to do.
I think the board was responsive to the need in elementary, which is why I have this district-wide elementary position, because the equity across the board for elementary principals was really lacking, because we had one school that had an assistant principal, and then we had all of the other schools without. So that is greatly appreciated. It would be because some elementary schools have 500 kids, and then we have secondary schools that maybe have 300, but they have an AP. So it's interesting from an equity perspective.
Elementary schools are well supported. My job is so much easier.
And that was I think point number 1 in last year's.
One of them. I don't know what the order was.
So in the work and Ms. Heineken and Weaver can correct me if I'm wrong, but this work really started last budget season. Is that correct? As far as hard PTR staffing allocations within the budget tool to generate allocations?
The tool was adopted. Rigid. The PTR always was there.
Right.
But we have a lot more control, and we certainly can allocate staffing based on those things. It's a little bit complicated because,
different pot.
But, right, and then you've got, use Barnett for an example. They're very exceptions to the rule. But it is, there are some standards out there that exist that were not forced into our system. The PTR is forced right now. Hard numbers, but it is we had that conversation last year.
I just noticed it was.
And it's not in here. You're right. And we have talked about it in our office. Kind of have taken a small step back with my budget file because just the learning curve of the new software. But it is something that we are talking about.
But yes, I'm gonna look into that because I want to go look back at that statement because if I recall, it talked about continuing work into this budget. So I'm gonna look at possibly adding something to that nature into this document.
I totally understand any hesitation as soon as you try and tie an average to things and you lose specificity. And you mentioned earlier this year the idea that giving some more site-based control, you get this pot of money. How would you like to allocate to that? I totally get that.
Right.
Kind of make something more.
I'm sorry.
At a high school level versus 500 with one
I don't think that's a question that the three of us
qualified to
I
answer.
wondered if there isn't a standard formula. How is it determined?
This is a conversation that an assistant superintendent should be involved because they can really offer more insight, I think, than
Absolutely.
us.
And I didn't mean that with any kind of critical tone. I'm just confused as to.
And I
honest, legitimate question.
Our school has tipped over close to 600 and still had one principal, one behavior aide, one guidance.
Specifically, like multiples in your positions that do that?
So there's been a legacy position at Arctic Light of an assistant principal that's been there forever, and that position was historically divided between Arctic Light and then the highest demand other school in the district. So basically 2 schools had the benefit of an AP. Arctic Light usually kept the AP 4 days a week, and the other school did the AP 1 day a week. So in creating this position, Arctic Light retains that position, and that is being divided now between Arctic Light and Fix It for our elementary. And then I'm being divided currently between LAD, Joy, and Lean as high-need schools, and then as needed in other places. So like this week I'm at Hutchinson subbing for Robin. So I'm sort of a utility player.
Lots of
those
sort
are
of doing the same thing?
And there are I believe 2 positions out of curriculum, and those are already licensed people. So while their title is intern, they are licensed. So they've already gone through the procedures and everything, but they are working through curriculum. And then they go, I know Lori Willett works with me at LAD 1 day a week, and she's also a Barnett. And I'm not certain where Kelly Coon is going, but she's one of those.
Grant funded.
Oh, those are grant.
Those are grant funded, yeah. They're not funded with the general.
I think the principal
Kelly's at our school, but she's not always there, and then she's subbing. Like, so she'll be
What's nice about actually being assigned to a building for a length of time is that you do get to build those relationships with the families and with the staff. So you're much more impactful because you have that background with them. So when you go from place to place to place, you don't really have a chance to build those. And that would be ideal, would be to have somebody when they're familiar with you.
principal. It's hard for her to explain her a titled position like vice principal or that role.
And it's a little bit almost demeaning to say I'm the admin helper, when you're a licensed professional. And all issues.
Yeah.
We got a little far afield.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, I'm going to look into that. So, point taken. Other comments, questions? The very end just talks about our future meetings, one in February, one in April. And yeah, going forward, we'll by February I think they're well into the legislative session, I believe, by February, aren't they?
So, depending on what happens with the ordinance, budget could be completely thrown off for the one that you guys are preparing for.
Yeah, I mean, if the current ordinance passed, yeah, it'd be scramble mode. I think if we can get this alternative substitute ordinance, I think that's manageable. That's a workable.
So if with only February and April being the next two, or the last 2 budget meetings for this budget, if the ordinance were to affect the budget more than we would hope for, then would more meetings be scheduled for the budget committee?
That's a good question. I don't know if we haven't in the past, yeah. I'm sure there's nothing that prevents us from doing that.
I don't know that our priorities would So we certainly can meet, but is the ordinance going to change our priorities?
Change what the priorities are. That's probably a good.
That would be my question. Is it going to change the direction that?
I was going to say it will completely change.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely some hard decisions would have to be made. I don't know if there's a process in place where this body could give input or feedback from December 4th on. I'm not sure. I'd have to check on that. But if there's a way, if there's a process that we could follow that we could do that, I'd certainly be open to doing that.
One of the things I looked at when I read through is I was very happy to see number 1 in there. That last sentence in number 2, I felt that was pretty strong. Developing and implementing the plan across all schools district, maximizes investment, that type of thing. I think that really sums up number 2 quite well. And then with number 3, I mean, just even if the ordinance goes through, it doesn't mean there won't be a fund balance. And so still looking with this type of an idea is going forward, fund balance in whatever shape or form it takes at this point in time. I mean, this is still solid ideology in how to use whatever's left over.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, the numbers will change for, I think, for the fund balance.
Other comments? I able to wrap up a little early tonight. My general feeling and kind of wrapping up my feelings as we head into the budget season is I'm optimistic. I think we're gonna. I'm hopeful that we'll come out of this ordinance process with something that's workable for the district. I think it'll be a good compromise. Again, I think ideally, we want no ordinance, but if we're going to have one, if we're going to have a cap, I think I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get to a point where it's workable for the district, and that those dollars will be there to carry us through the next 2 to 3 years. Just saw a economic report first of this week, I believe it was, that the price of oil is currently hovering around the break-even point for the year. If we've actually been ahead of that break-even point for the state so far in the current fiscal year. It just dipped below recently. We've had a little bit of a drop in oil prices lately, but at the current rates, it's projecting that deficit for the state budget to be far less than originally they had projected a $700 million deficit for this year. But hopeful that those numbers can hold, that we won't be looking at nearly the deficit, but contrast that with the new governor. Hopefully he takes a more balanced approach than the rhetoric in the past. So I'm hopeful. Again, I know it's a high priority. I can't speak for individual board members, but the board as a whole, in my short time here, has spoken of the top priority being to maintain class sizes which obviously is reflected in the survey results. That is important to the community. So I know that's a top priority, and that we're gonna hang on to things like that as much as we can. And I'm confident that we'll be able to do that. So can't promise anything, but I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. So, any other comments or Ms. Marati is our board member representative? Anything you want to add to that? I know you're new as well. I don't want to put you on the spot,
but I think as elected officials, we have to take what the community has provided through the survey very seriously. But even before the surveys, I think everybody knew that class size and school safety and intervention services and whatnot, I think those have always been a priority for the board. So I'm like you said, I'm confident that myself and the board are going to uphold those opinions. I did have a question. How difficult would it be to implement some of the survey or tie some of the survey results to the memo to the board? The full survey results are going to be presented to the board at the same time. Okay, so they'll tie it together.
So I'm not sure if it's the exact same report, but it's the same meeting at that December 4th meeting. Okay. So they will.
Yeah, like I said, it's not going to be any surprises.
Right.
But it is good to know what the community is saying.
Absolutely.
And it's the best way to hear it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's great to hear your opinions too. And I look forward to the board working with you guys throughout the rest of the year.
All right.
Always, if there's any questions.
Next
we meet is
February 27th. So that's going to be in line with the proposed budget is due to the board from the district on February 1st. And so that February 27th meeting is lined up for us to meet after that proposed budget is submitted. And then our April 17th meeting is lined up with recommended budget being sent to the borough. So there's three different versions of the budget. There's proposed, that's the first draft. The second draft is recommended, which the board works the proposed budget and completes the recommended budget, which then goes across the river to the borough. And then they set their local contribution. That comes back to us, and we finalize the dot the I's and cross the T's. Make sure there's no surprises in the local contribution. More often than not, it's what we expect, so there's no surprises. But if there were a surprise, there's a final working of that budget for the approved budget. So we'll go ahead and wrap things up and look forward.
Tomorrow.
That's due to Sharon tomorrow morning. Do we send that out?
Version.
Okay.
The final version.
Send out
in the draft one.
Yep, we'll send out the final version of the letter after that's.
Actually, Friday it's public.
We'll distribute it to committee members after it becomes public to board members. So, alrighty, February 27th at 5:30 is our next meeting, and I look forward to seeing you.